In the heart of winter's fury, one family's survival is tied to a hidden path beneath the snow, a secret tunnel known only to those who've lived in harmony with the land. As the blizzard rages, they rely on the wisdom of their ancestors to move unseen, untouched by the storm above. Before we begin, share where you're watching from, and if you believe in the power of ancient wisdom, subscribe. Tomorrow's legend runs even deeper than this one. The first snow came early that year. It was the 15th day of November, and the skies had already turned the color of slate, heavy with the promise of winter. By midday, the flakes began to fall slowly, almost peacefully. But the old man knew better. The mountain winds carried a cold bite, a sharpness that was unnatural for this time of year. The storm was coming. He had seen this before. He had heard the elders speak of winters like these winters that arrived unexpectedly, fierce and unforgiving. The trees along the edge of the valley shook with the rising wind, and the faintest rustling of the branches carried the scent of the coming snow. It was not just a storm, it was a test of survival. The man, whose name was Aki, was 58 winters old, though his body had the quiet strength of someone much younger. His hair was dark but streaked with silver, and his face was weathered by years of living in the mountains, guided by the teachings of his ancestors. Today, he was not just a man in the wilderness, he was a guardian of a legacy, a keeper of traditions older than the mountain itself. His family's lodge, built from the bones of the land, stood tucked beneath a rock face to the east of the river. It was a sturdy structure, crafted from cedar logs and covered with thick blankets of moss to keep the cold at bay. But Aki knew that the storm would test it in ways they had not seen in many years. His wife, Kaya, was inside, preparing the evening meal. She had been quiet all day, sensing the shift in the weather as deeply as he did. Their children, Tala and Nikan, had already gathered the last of the firewood, stacking it beside the door for easy access. Aki stepped outside and surveyed the land. The snow had begun to fall in earnest now, blanketing the valley in white. It was the kind of snow that could bury a person, swallow them whole if they were not careful. His heart quickened. He turned to the lodge, his mind already racing. There was no time to waste. They needed to move quickly. In the silence of the snowstorm, Aki's thoughts turned to the stories his grandfather had told him. Tales of the great blizzards that once ravaged the land. The tunnel. It had always been there, hidden beneath the earth, a secret that only the wise knew. It had been used in times of war to protect families when the world above was not safe. It was a path through the snow, a way to travel unseen by the storm, shielded by the mountain's ancient power. Aki's grandfather had once told him, "The mountain remembers, and it will keep those who know its ways safe." Now, as the winds howled and the snow began to fall in sheets, Aki knew it was time to pass this knowledge down. It was his turn to use the secret path. He turned toward the lodge. "Tala, Nikan," he called, his voice steady despite the growing storm. "Gather the supplies. We leave now." Kaya appeared at the door, her face calm, but Aki could see the worry in her eyes. "It is time," he said simply. With the storm threatening to consume them, the family moved with quiet urgency, preparing to follow the path that would take them beneath the snow, unseen and protected. They had walked this path before in dreams, and now it would be their only salvation. The air grew heavier with each step, the weight of the approaching storm pressing down on them like a silent predator. Aki led the way, his footsteps deep in the snow, his eyes scanning the horizon. He could see the snow swirling in the distance, the storm gaining strength as it crossed the valley toward them. His family, huddled close behind, moved without a sound, following him as they had always done, trusting in his quiet leadership. Aki had learned the way of the mountain from his father, and his father before him. They had spoken of the hidden tunnel beneath the earth, a path carved by the spirits and shaped by the hands of the ancestors. It had been used long ago during the days of conflict, when the land was filled with warriors and danger. But it was more than just a passage. It was a secret, a gift from the mountain itself. Those who knew its ways were always kept safe, even when the world above them was wild with storm and fury. They came to a small rise in the ground, and Aki stopped. His breath came out in clouds of vapor as he scanned the landscape. "Here," he whispered. The others gathered around, waiting. Aki knelt beside the earth, brushing aside the snow that had accumulated over the years. Beneath it was a jagged rock face, worn by time, with a faint crack running through the center. He reached into the crack and began to pull at the stones, working them loose with practiced hands. Tala and Nikan, the children, watched with wide eyes, understanding the significance of the moment, but not yet grasping the full weight of it. Kaya, ever calm, stood with her arms wrapped tightly around her fur-lined cloak, her face set in an expression of quiet resolve. The stones shifted easily in Aki's hands. He had practiced this many times in his youth, though he had never thought he would need to use it again. The crack opened wide enough for him to slide his hand inside, feeling the cool, damp air from the passage that lay beyond. He smiled slightly, a moment of quiet triumph. "Come," Aki urged. "The storm will be upon us soon." One by one, they crawled into the opening, the earth closing behind them as they entered the tunnel. The narrow path curved downward, the walls rough and uneven. Aki led the way, followed by Kaya, then Tala, and finally Nikan. They moved quickly but cautiously, the quiet of the tunnel surrounding them like a cloak. The world above, filled with the howl of the wind and the fury of the snow, was now distant, almost forgotten. Aki's heart beat steadily as they descended deeper into the earth. The path twisted and turned, but it was familiar to him. He had walked this way many times before, in dreams and in stories. It had always been there, waiting for the right moment. And now, in the dead of winter, with the storm bearing down upon them, it was their lifeline. The tunnel stretched on, cold and damp, but safe. Each step took them further from the storm, further from danger, until they would emerge somewhere beyond the mountain, hidden from the eyes of the world above. The tunnel grew darker as they moved deeper beneath the earth, the sound of their footsteps muffled by the thick stone walls. Aki led, his hand brushing the rough surface of the rock as if seeking reassurance from the land itself. He could feel the storm's rage just above them, the winds howling like wild wolves. But here, in this secret passage, they were safe. For now. Behind him, Kaya moved silently, her breath slow and steady, though Aki could see the tension in her shoulders. Tala and Nikan followed closely, their small hands gripping the walls for balance. Tala, the older of the two children at 12 winters old, whispered, "Father, how much longer?" Aki paused, his heart heavy. "Not much longer, Tala," he said, his voice calm despite the weight of the situation. "We must be patient. The storm will pass, and we will find our way." Tala nodded, though the unease in her eyes lingered. Nikan, only 7 winters old, said nothing, but he clung to his mother's side, his small face pale in the dim light of the tunnel. Kaya reached down to place a hand on his shoulder, giving him a comforting squeeze. They continued onward, the path winding and twisting, beneath the earth. The smell of damp stone filled the air, a sharp contrast to the icy bite of the blizzard above. Aki could feel the cold seeping through the walls, though the tunnel itself seemed to hold a warmth, a subtle protection that was more than just physical. It was the shelter of the earth, the spirit of the land that had protected his ancestors for countless generations. After what seemed like hours, the passage began to open, the ceiling rising higher, the walls less jagged. Aki's pace quickened. He knew they were getting closer to the exit. The tunnel would eventually lead them to a hidden grove, a small clearing nestled in the forest where they could rest before the storm passed. But as they neared the exit, Aki's heart raced. He could hear it now, the storm's fury above them. The wind had picked up, and the snow had begun to fall in heavy sheets. The mountain was angry, its power unleashed on the world above. The passage they had followed, so safe and silent, now, seemed like a fragile thread, a fragile lifeline between them and the violent world outside. "We must hurry," Aki urged, his voice steady but firm. Kaya moved faster, her hand tightening around Nikan's as she urged him onward. The children's footsteps echoed in the narrowing tunnel as they quickened their pace. Suddenly, Aki stopped, his heart pounding in his chest. A flicker of light reached the end of the tunnel. They were almost there. But as he reached the opening, he hesitated. The light from the storm outside shone bright, harsh, and cold. The snowstorm had arrived in full force. Aki's heart raced as he stepped out of the tunnel, his boots crunching into the deep snow. The wind was already picking up, howling through the valley like a restless spirit. He held his breath, looking out over the white expanse that stretched before him. The snow had fallen thick and fast, covering everything in sight, but the entrance to the tunnel remained hidden, their path sheltered at least for now. "Stay close," he whispered, turning back to his family, his voice nearly swallowed by the storm's fury. Kaya was the first to emerge, her face pressed tightly against her fur-lined cloak to shield herself from the biting wind. Tala and Nikan followed, each of them moving with quiet urgency. The snow was already waist-deep in places, and the wind's strength pushed them back with every step. Aki scanned the surroundings, his mind racing. He had been here before, in the snow, in the dead of winter. He knew the land, but the storm was different this time. It was fierce, a reminder from the mountain that it could be merciless if one wasn't careful. They had to move quickly, find shelter, anything to keep them safe from the worst of it. He started forward, cutting a path through the snow. He moved with purpose, each step deeper into the storm, with Kaya and the children following his lead. Tala's voice came from behind him, soft but clear above the howling wind. "Father, how much further?" Tala asked. She was 12 winters old, strong for her age, but even she couldn't help but feel the fear that crept into her bones as the storm raged around them. "Not much farther, Tala," Aki said, though he couldn't keep the uncertainty from his voice. He could feel the storm closing in around them, and he knew that every moment they spent out in the open increased the risk. He had to trust in the path he knew, trust in the hidden grove that lay ahead. They moved through the storm as quickly as they could, with Aki leading them, his footsteps firm and sure. The wind howled in every direction, snow falling so thick that it was hard to see more than a few paces ahead, but Aki pressed on, knowing they couldn't afford to stop. The wind shifted suddenly, the snow swirling fiercely around them. Aki's heart pounded as he turned to check on Kaya and the children. They were moving behind him, struggling to keep up with the deepening snow. Nikan, smaller than Tala, was already lagging, his steps heavy in the thickening snow. Kaya reached down and gently guided him forward, her hand steady, her eyes watching Aki for reassurance. The trees ahead began to take form, standing like dark sentinels against the storm. They were close. They had made it to the edge of the grove where the snow would be lighter, where the trees would shield them from the worst of the storm. Aki took a breath, but it felt too soon to rest. He kept moving, the family following without a word, knowing that silence and speed would keep them hidden from the storm's gaze. As they reached the shelter of the trees, Aki finally slowed, his body aching with the cold and the effort. The storm raged, but they were safe for now. The storm continued to rage outside the shelter of the trees, but inside the world was still. Aki sat with his back against a thick trunk, his breath steady as he watched the fire crackle and pop. Kaya, beside him, was tending to Nikan, wrapping him in a thick blanket. Tala sat a little farther away, her face drawn but calm as she watched the fire dance. They had made it. The tunnel had sheltered them. The path beneath the snow had been their salvation, but now, in the quiet of the night, Aki knew the journey was far from over. The storm would pass, but the land's lessons would endure long after the winds died down. Kaya, sensing his thoughts, turned to him. "You did well," she said softly. Her voice was filled with the quiet strength that always grounded him, but Aki could see the unspoken gratitude in her eyes. They had made it through the worst of the storm, and it was a victory he didn't take lightly. Aki nodded, but his thoughts were still on the storm. He knew that survival in this world, in this land, came not from strength alone, but from understanding. Understanding the land, the weather, the rhythm of the seasons. Knowing when to build and when to shelter, when to move and when to stay. "You did well, too," he said quietly. "But we are not out of danger yet. The storm will pass, but the mountain is never fully tamed." Kaya nodded, her hand resting on Nikan's head. "I know, but we are safe for now." Aki stood, his body stiff from the cold, and looked out through the trees. The wind howled in the distance, but the shelter of the grove held firm. This is the lesson of our ancestors, Aki said, his voice carrying softly to his family. The land will always give, but it will also take. It will provide shelter when we know how to listen, and it will take it away if we forget how to honor it. Tala, her eyes wide and curious, looked up at him. Father, how did you know to take us to the tunnel? How did you know it would be safe? Aki's eyes softened, and he crouched down beside her, brushing the snow from her hair. The mountain teaches us, Tala. It speaks in the winds, the snow, the trees. But we must listen carefully. Our people have lived here for generations. The knowledge is passed down from our grandparents to us. The tunnel is part of that knowledge. It's not just a way through the storm. It's a path given by the mountain itself. Tala nodded, though she was still trying to grasp the weight of his words. Nikan, still wrapped in his blanket, looked up at his father. Will the storm be gone soon? He asked, his voice small. Aki smiled and nodded. Yes, little one, the storm will pass. And when it does, we will move again. Kaya looked at Aki, her eyes filled with quiet trust. The storm would pass, and they would be ready when it did. For now, they rested beneath the trees, safe in the knowledge that the land would always provide if they were wise enough to listen.